Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully she hops on because she's the one kicking us off. But don't want to start too late because we've got lots of great content to cover. So welcome, everybody. My name is Bailey Johnson. I'm the Event and Marketing Manager for Impact Hub Minneapolis-St. Paul. And Impact Hub is a global organization dedicated to supporting social entrepreneurs across the world. So there are over 100 Impact Hubs all over the world, each one a little different based on their local context, but all supporting social entrepreneurs who want to make positive social and environmental change. And part of that is by focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. So today we're covering how to incorporate the SDGs into your startup to really make an impact. So Terri isn't here. Hopefully she'll hop back on, but I'll introduce her. She is the co-founder of Impact Hub Minneapolis-St. Paul and has continued to be a senior volunteer and consultant with us over the past 6 years. She's also an adjunct faculty member with the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and advisor with the Carlson School of Business, and currently working as a principal with Cogent Consulting PVC. So even though she says she's retired, she's still very busy. So I told you a little bit about Impact Hub. We really are built to engineer serendipity to enable transformational impact. And we do that by focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals as a lens through which to view our impact in the world. And if you aren't familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, these are the 17 goals that have been decided upon that we're working towards to accomplish by 2030. And Terri, welcome back. I quickly introduced you and Impact Hub, so if you just want to jump in now and share more about these Sustainable Development Goals before we open it up to the panel, that would be awesome.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you all joined us. At Impact Hub, we are focusing on strategies that really help mission-driven entrepreneurs, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, helping them understand how to focus on the impact they're making and build connections with others. There are 16,000 people that are part of Impact Hubs around the world. And so what we are doing is helping individuals figure out, here's the SDGs I'm working on, and then secondly, helping them connect to others with those common shared interests. So it's the place, if you want to activate what you're doing around SDGs, we're the place that can help you do that. The Sustainable Development Goals were approved by the United Nations adopted in 2015, but they were built on the work that happened in Brazil with a number of other countries earlier on in the year 2000, as they said, we've got to figure out how we can share common goals across the globe to really be able to eliminate poverty. So these Sustainable Development Goals are an iteration of a work that started in 2000, and they're goals for 2030. So they have a deadline and they have a framework. And if you go to the UN's website about sustainability, actually will give you additional information about strategies that have been proven, ways to begin to describe the impact you're having. There's a lot of work going on how to measure that impact. And so these are really nice organizing tools. And so we're really excited to be able to help bring SDGs to Minnesota.
Thank you, Terri. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mark Ritchie, our moderator for today's session.
Thank you very much. And just to briefly go around to give the audience a sense of ourselves, I'm currently the president of Global Minnesota, which is a 70-year-old organization that connects Minnesotans to the world and the world to Minnesotans. But our mission is advancing international understanding and engagement. And one of the most important things that has woven us together as a people on the planet is the agreement on the shared goals, the sustainable development goals. And the final one, number 17, is the one about partnerships, about how we go about that. And in my life, that's been a sort of a North Star of a certain kind. I was part of the starting up of the company we now call Peace Coffee, and the organization we call Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. And in all of those startup opportunities that I've had in my life, I've needed that place of vision where I could say what we want to do is, yes, sell the best coffee in the world, but we want it to have an impact. We want it to be transformative in the lives of people who are growing and producing and bringing this gift to us. And so the Sustainable Development Goals help us in all kinds of ways. And I'm thrilled to be part of this panel today to help the viewers out there think about why it's so important to incorporate these goals and how you might go about doing that. Miki, you're next to me on the Zoom screen. You'll go next.
All right. Bonjour. Dinoe Maganaduk. So hello, everybody, all my relatives on the chat. I'm based out of Minneapolis, but I'm the managing director for Indian Fun, for Indian Collective, which is an indigenous-led organization focused on kind of power shifting in both capital spaces and supporting social enterprise. But we also do a lot of other work. So we're like an umbrella organization with different sub-entities focused on advocacy, policy, grant making, capacity building, developing equity, and lending. And I think what's really exciting is everything that we're focused on are around these 3Ds: defend, develop, decolonize. And again, it's to build capacity investment opportunities to defend our people's land, all of our people's water, air, culture, community, and also develop regenerative, sustainable, and model new economies. And that has offshoots into social well-being, community well-being, global well-being. And we, right now, I'll just be honest, don't focus as much on the SDGs. So you might think, why the heck are you on this talk? And it's because rather than focus on them, we hold our ecological and developmental ancestral knowledge as like the guide to designing these regenerative economies and working with financial systems and technology and everything that's expressive of basically what pre-contact economies were for indigenous peoples. We feel like you guys are all catching up now, but we've been holding these practices forever. And we also intend to disrupt those Western reductionist systems in order to do that. I think it's finally turning around, right, that this is even written in and put into these principles with the UN. So it's hard to answer which of those 17 goals, like I said, because they're all in different pockets of our work. But we do have resilient and regenerative lending screens and different, tools in our toolkit to be able to advance what all of those 17 goals. They're built into our mission, practices, evaluation, et cetera. Happy to talk about that a little bit more after, but check. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Silvia.
Hi, everyone. I am Silvia Ontaneda, and I was for many years in the Foreign Service, in the Ecuadorian Foreign Service, and I had the privilege of representing Ecuador for 16 years, almost 16 years in Minnesota. And in 2016, after being a little bit frustrated with how government don't push the agenda of the SDGs, I was able to be on the 2015 steering planning committee on behalf of Ecuador for the SDGs, and I thought, it's really I think we can do more if we become economically activist on behalf of everyone to to have an inclusive economy. And of course, I started the process of how to build a system that can provide access to everyone, to those communities, is particular to those communities that don't have access to trade, to international trade, and to promote socially inclusive and economically inclusive ecosystems. So I founded the Trade Center of the Americas. It's a model, a business model that tries to include the goal number one, no poverty, gender equality, decent work, and economic growth. We are based on decent work and economic growth, actually, innovation, reduce inequalities, and of course, partnership for the goals. Those are our pillars of the business. And we are focused, our main objective is providing opportunities for indigenous people, women, and small businesses.
Miki.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As I put in the chat, I want to wish everyone a happy autumnal equinox and National Voter Registration Day today. I'm Miki Huntington, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. I wear a lot of different hats. I'm an educator, a speaker, a facilitator, a certified life coach, and I'm also a military veteran. So I served in the military for 25 years before I transitioned into a career in teaching. Right now, I'm teaching political science and global studies courses, and I'm also founder and certified life coach at Miki Huntington Coaching and Consulting. I noticed a couple of folks chimed in the chat with your favorite sustainable development goals. I saw a couple of folks recognize SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being. That's one of the focus areas that I like to prioritize. And in addition to that, obviously as an educator, Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education, and goal number 10, reduced inequalities, or as I like to say, equity. So thank you all so much for joining, and we look forward to talking with you more about Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, thank you, everybody, for all your work and being the panel. I love the fact that we're already talking about some specifics. Number 3 of health, as a group of us trying to bring a World's Fair to Minnesota in 2027, focused on SDG 3, good health and well-being for all at all ages. And so it's exciting to see the interest on the panel and in the chat box. So one of the questions is little nuggets of advice. If somebody says, I want to incorporate this into my startup, so that's really specific in a cycle of life, what kind of sage advice would you give them? Anybody? Nikki.
Sure. This is interestingly enough, probably the question I think I have the least to say about it, because otherwise I'm long-winded. I think make it part of your operating charter, your thesis, your business principles, your mission, whatever you want to call it. Because otherwise it won't happen. So as an example, I was on a call with, Indian Fund is also a native CDFI that funds businesses, but on a call with this other cohort, and they were talking about SDGs, all of these principles. So I think they were ahead of the curve, but they said, how do we incentivize the rest of the industry, right? And I said, you just make it a requirement, and then there's no incentivization, needed to be thought about, because they said at one point, and just speaking openly and candidly, there were hiring practices, and they're still there, but they were openly discriminatory, right, against persons of color. And at some point, they just had to, right, because law made it so. So I think about, if you think about the world and, and believe science that we might be on the verge of like a 6th extinction, that gender equality is important. If you believe in those goals 1 through 17, then you treat them as a law and a necessity, both from an industry standpoint, a policy standpoint, but even if you're an individual business, then you can start there. So I won't go down this too farther, but my family has also started their own business, Harvest Nation, and it's female owned, and it's based on our home reservation here in Minnesota. But part of what they're doing is they're thinking of talking with producers about how to build in microgrids, right? So they're doing networking, and they're trying to find solar tax credits and ways to also finance those things. So I think if there's a will, you do it, and it's not, well, should we be thinking about those things? It's built into the mission of the business. So then the answer is, then how do we pay for it? Find the programming, government grants, private grants to subsidize some of it and extend access, right? So hiring practices, there are government programs that will pay them to hire people to build workforce, right, in certain communities. They'll also be able to apply for SNAP or food stamps for the food that they're growing. It's an aeroponic vertical farm. So if there's a will, there's a way. So I guess I say make it mandatory.
Great.
Yeah.
Other suggestions, words of wisdom?
It's me. I'll jump right in and offer a few thoughts. Primarily as an educator and also as a life coach, I hear folks tell me a lot, I really want to be of service, or I really want to make a positive impact, right? And while it's certainly a very noble cause to use your work for the greater good, especially if you're a social entrepreneur or starting a startup, it's sometimes hard to know what to do or where to begin or how to make a difference. And I think in that sense, the Sustainable Development Goals can offer such a helpful framework for how to make a difference. The reason it was so important for me to incorporate the SDGs into my work is that it allows me to align my efforts to a set of overarching goals, right? It helps to keep me focused. It helps for me to stay focused on quality education and what that might look like. It helps me to focus very intentionally on reducing inequalities in our communities, so that I believe that all of the concepts of the Sustainable Development Goals go hand in hand, right? Teaching and civic engagement can't be separated. Teaching and social justice can't be separated. For me, my life coaching and making a positive impact can't be separated. So really integrating the elements of the Sustainable Development Goals in a way that resonates with your business, your purpose, and your passion.
I completely agree with Miki and Nikki. I think integrating in even at a level of policy and working together as a society. I am not from Minnesota, and I think from what I've done a lot of work in Latin America, and I feel like the US is a little bit behind on learning what the SDGs are. If you go to Latin America, every country at every level, government, corporations, elementary schools, they have all adopted the SDGs as part of their mission, and as part of even to have access to loans, to whatever they do, maybe because there is the need and we feel it that way. But when I started this project, it's been very challenging for me to explain that there is a possibility of building a different economy, building a more inclusive economy where all actors should have a place at the table. And that's probably more an education process, not so much for students. Well, because I think the colleges and the education part are doing a great job, but for corporations, for government organizations, a little bit to incorporate that as a policy.
Terri, you've helped a lot of startups. You've started up a lot of things. What kind of advice would you give someone about how to integrate SDGs into their startups? You're muted.
Struggling with my computer right now. The first question I ask people is, what's in your heart? What is it that makes you want to work on change? What makes you get up every morning to try and make the world better? and then give them the vocabulary the SDGs provides for them to be able to say, oh, here's the few words I can use to talk about it. I think that that's one of the greatest pieces of about the SDGs is it allows people to be able to quickly align and to quickly articulate, oh, here's where my passion is. So that a lot of startups, the other challenge they have is zeroing in on something. And so as Miki said, if you can just say, here, I'm going to work in this category and this one, and they are connected, it just is really helpful for people to be able to talk about what they're focused on. And it also gives them a sense that they're not alone. People who are starting new ventures really struggle with the loneliness of being an entrepreneur, and realizing that there are lots of others working in that same field is really energizing.
Have any of you used a procedure or a process that's given you some numeric calculation, like setting a goal, I want to help reduce traffic fatalities by X or something, and then been able to track your company or your actions in contributing to that sort of numeric, I mean, these are goals and they have a numeric component?
Are we going in the same order? I'm just...
Anytime.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Because I want to leave. I'll probably donate most of my time to Miki and Silvia and maybe Terri. But at Indian Collective, part of the, like, again, that defend, develop, decolonize, we're creating an entire metrics framework. So that includes metrics.
Great.
Yeah, that it will track our work in, you know, advocacy or bringing in new philanthropic dollars into Native communities. But it also looks at all of the work, you know, in the defend category as we think about it, defending, you know, natural resources, land, et cetera. But we also have metrics for how are we thinking of racial equity, right? So everything we do is it's all connected. And so I'm looking at those 17, and because we're such a large organization, we have metrics for every single category. And maybe we're able to be unique in that because we're larger. So I'm not speaking from like my family's business standpoint, but I think the beautiful thing is, you know, being able to just have a good, I will say this, a good software and a good system where you can kind of play with it and develop it as you go and customize them. Because then you can customize it to your business, to your industry, and to scale. So at Indian Collective, doing things here, my family's doing them here, but we also have really well-developed software that allows us to be really creative and inventive with it.
Great advice. Any other examples?
This is Miki. I'll just jump in and add to what Nikki shared. I just love this, Nikki and Miki. It's interesting as a life coach where a lot of my clients will approach me and say, well, how can you hold me accountable, right? So having metrics, having a clear definition of what your success outcome or goal is going to be is critical. In my line of work, particularly in higher education, not only do we look at metrics in the sense of quantitative, right? What's our success rate in graduation? How many students completed their coursework, so on and so forth. But I think also the qualitative measures, the qualitative metrics, right? In our case, improving in quality education. For your startup, it might be some other sort of broader general good that you want to contribute to society. So I think it's important when we talk about metrics that we look both at the hard numbers, the quantitative side, as well as the qualitative side in really measuring or assessing our success.
Great point. To me, the most surprising data, it was when I just started a conversation on social media, on LinkedIn, and I decided to put together training on SDGs and trade and what is the relationship. I promoted in 2 days, and we have 200 people in the first 2 hours. And then we ended up having 500 people on the first training with less than 48 hours of advertising. And our business model is made out of memberships, or we try. So that's a good way of tracking what are the needs, how can we help, and also connect mentors with, corporations with the small businesses or indigenous initiatives, like transfer of technology or transfer of knowledge, indigenous ancestral knowledge. And to me, the most amazing impact is 2,000 people signing up for learning about indigenous people's knowledge from Minnesota and North Dakota. And I was like, how that it's just been an an eye-opening experience on how to measure not only people, companies looking for profits, but just the connection. But it's more the connection from Latin America to the US more than the US to Latin America. So, and because we are based on that, our business model is transfer trade and international development from and to Latin America and Minnesota, the Midwest. So that's that. I do think that there is a need, there is a void that I think Minnesota's business model and values can provide a great venue for that.
Great way to measure.
And Silvia, I'm glad you raised the cross continent kinds of connections, because when I think about trying to measure the SDGs, number 17 is really the hardest one to measure, because it's about how do you make connections and when do you say you're successful at having a connection happen? And then is the connection itself good enough for the kind of change that you're driving for? So I think and Impact Hub is the same. Number 17 is a great majority of what the work is about, is getting people connected to one another. So I think that's one of the hardest ones to measure. There's some other ones that have been, my background has been predominantly in philanthropy and social services. And I spent a lot of time at United Way, where we demanded the organizations we funded to define the outcome they wanted and to report on that. So I spent a lot of time looking at what are legitimate measures for early childhood education, for working with kids that are struggling, for family success. So if you're working on those, you can look at the social sciences, and there's more content about what is a reasonable way to measure your success. And then I also start thinking about Ecotone Analytics, one of the Impact Hub member organizations, and the excellent work they're doing on helping people realize that it isn't just the people who are your customers that get impacted by your work, but it has a broader effect on the community. And if you keep somebody out of prison, and what are the costs of the community that are saved? If you help somebody who's come out of prison be able to turn their life around and get a job and get housing and be able to be a contributing citizen, what effect does that have on the economy and housing? The effects are have reverberating and much more expansive impacts on the community that we can pay attention to. And there are places to go to be able to get the metrics you need to be able to claim that.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed in the chat, Nikki put up some information about one of the metrics they're using with the Indian Collective. Bailey put up the website for Ecotone, which is a very, very successful local Minneapolis, Twin Cities base that's helping folks really see what the in a sense, the savings might be. I know sometimes people think of the SDGs and their minds go to, oh, what does it cost to, get to zero hunger, or what does it cost? And I work a lot on SDG 3, health, good health and well-being, but especially SDG 3.6. There's a lot of subparts, which is to reduce road fatalities and injuries by half. And I tell you, if there's something that would save society money, it's reducing road fatalities and injuries. And when some very large companies, Cargill being one of the more recent examples, just decided to ban distracted driving, cell phone driving in their entire global organization, and then they put a lot of muscle behind lobbying to get cell phone use while driving banned, back to Nikki's first comment, it saved X numbers of lives, period. It did not cost money. It saved millions and lives and grief and loss. And so I think thinking into the metrics also spurs us to think about the savings part of this, to be able to then think more directly about some things that do have a cost. You want to have a vaccination for the measles or smallpox, there's an expense. So where does that come from? It might come from stopping these car crashes that are killing our children and our families and our loved ones, and the injuries that forever cost the whole society. And it's been a real joy to see the advancement in our metric ability and our measurement ability, and that's been one of the real changes. I know all of you have been active in many different things, and Silvia mentioned seeing in Latin America more SDG activity kind of everywhere. I experienced that. I was asking the Mexican government for their vote for Minnesota's Expo bid, and they had me call Mexico City to their foreign minister, and he said, "Are you incorporating the SDGs?" And I said, "Yes, it is our theme." And he said, "You have our vote." So this is a real thing. But are you seeing SDG in some unusual or unexpected places that you'd like to share as part of our discussion? Some organization or some book or some piece of writing, or just something that would help the audience see the depth and breadth of how this is being a North Star for so many.
Oh,
Nikki,
okay.
I think Nikki
Yeah,
does it.
I think more than anything,
You're
not directly answering the question, but I'm surprised in the places that it's not. And to say just where we have, venues, and when we all used to get to meet outside of virtual world with impact investors, social investors, it seems like a lot of times they're buzzwords. And so then when you get down to, okay, so you're saying like 75% of them say, we think it's important to fund like in indigenous communities and to think about like ecology, and it's in the surveys of all of these people that are like embracing the SDGs. And it seems like the industry is primed to do that, right? They're kind of the forerunners of it. And then I'm just so surprised because I'm so new to this space, probably just the last couple of years, to learn like in practice when they actually do their underwriting or what their term sheets look like, how they invest in actual businesses. It doesn't look like that often. And so I'm learning there's really just like a microcosm of this entire community that truly embraces the SDGs. So I guess I'd rather hear less about them and more about the practice of. And so I'm surprised in the places that they're not. And I would love to hear more about being surprised in a good way about the places that they are that you didn't anticipate. So thank you for shining some sunshine my way. Thank you.
this is Miki. I'll jump in with a couple of those surprising positive in which the SDGs show up. And this is not so much about me as an educator as much as it is about my students. So one of the opportunities that I have is a chance to teach a course in the summer called Human Rights and the Educated Citizen. And the course happens to be a community engagement course. So every single student who's in that course is required to do a community engagement project, really reaching out to the Minneapolis-St. Paul communities, seeing how they can actively apply the concepts of the Sustainable Development Goals by interacting with an individual, an organization, a nonprofit, a startup, someone in the community with whom to partner with regard to this community engagement project. I was blown away by the projects that the students submitted this summer. One student focused on equal access to education. She talked about her family immigrating here to the United States just to try and access education for her and her siblings. Somebody else focused on the plight of homelessness. If you've been following current events in the Twin Cities, we all understand that that is an ongoing challenge we need to address. And so I had students go down there and talk with organizations that were actively on the ground, making a positive impact to support the folks who were in need. Other topics that were chosen with the community engagement projects were gender inequality, health and well-being, environmental concerns as well. And so I share these examples to offer that if you're a startup, if you're just getting going, it doesn't have to be a large scale, huge project, right? Every single one of us has a role to play in introducing or building on the concepts that the Sustainable Development Framework offers us to make a positive impact. So once again, these are just students in my classes who, within the framework of a project, within the framework of an SDG or two, were able to cultivate relationships in the community and move forward in making a positive impact.
Nikki posted that we're becoming more conscious about thinking about design, about the notion of cost savings from pre-recovery instead of recovery by doing something like building a storm wall instead of rebuilding flooded out houses. And I think it's a kind of precautionary principle, and it has one of the elements of the looking ahead 7 generations. If you're expecting to be on your land because you are on your land, then you care about who's taking care of it before, and you care about who's going to come after. And then you begin to think more deeply about where we do invest. And that's certainly something that startups have to balance. They want to figure out cash flow and get things going, but they want to do things right because their reputation will start on day one. Their brand will be born at the beginning. Some startups have a purpose that's a product. Some startups have a purpose that's a service. Some startups are somewhere in between. There's a product, but there's a service that comes with it. Do any of you on the panel today have some specific examples where you saw one of the, maybe a merchant or a service that you've used or you've observed, where you saw that somebody had done a really smart, really creative job of building in the SDGs in a way that you could say, oh, that made that business more successful by doing that? I mean, I was involved in Fair Trade Coffee. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Impact Hub has actually, to me, Impact Hub has been a revelation. Before Impact Hub, I couldn't find a supportive system for my startup. That was a place where I could really develop and my ideas could evolve, and that's why we created the 4 pillars of this organization based on the SDGs. And we didn't, well, I didn't particularly based our objectives or our values on the SDGs, but it came along, like we integrated it after. But I found so many organizations on Impact Hub that are doing this. I don't have the names on the top of my mind right now, but there are two that are doing water process. How do you say that?
Purification?
Drinking
Mm-hmm.
water. Exactly. In Guatemala, there is one that is established in Mexico. There are so many that are right now even telling the stories. Telling the stories can make a social impact. And there is the iDialect of that is just a startup of telling the stories on how you impact the world. To that, it's such a simple idea, but it's so important because the social impact that brings sharing stories of immigrants, of people of color, of communities. To me, it's a way of including or being inclusive of the SDGs.
So if I can jump in here, Silvia talked about two of the organizations and that are at Impact Hub. There's another organization that I've spent a lot of time coaching in, and the company's name is Clip Different. And their whole focus is helping people with disabilities have more equal access and equity and independence. And that being able to continually articulate, oh yeah, that's our focus, has really helped them be able to continually revise and rethink what their product is. The product allows you to be able to clip your fingernails without needing two hands. But the pressure for them to make it available to everybody, to go from focusing on serving a population that has the most limitation to anybody who will pay for it and anybody who will help them make a profit. That tension in that conversation has been going on around that organization and within that organization since its beginning. And for them to be able to continue to just have in their head, this is who we want to make sure we're helping, has continually allowed them to be able to answer those questions as the business has grown and evolved. And so it's a really valuable kind of thing to have. And if you use an SDG, it becomes a visual and it becomes a really shorthand phrase you can use rather than the 3 paragraphs that you need to explain what you're working on otherwise.
Somebody asked in the chat, do you recommend how many SDGs we should focus on? Should we choose only 1 or 2 so we avoid scope creep and spreading ourselves too thin? Great question. Any advice?
I think just to combine your last question, Mark, with this one, that's a great one. So I think of just like, well, what kind of change, what are the outcomes we're trying to affect in the world from your business's standpoint, leaving initially maybe the SDGs on the side and then coming in and integrating them later, I think is a perfect way to do that. And I think of a business, they're actually one of our projects that we're going to invest in, so Indigenous owned, and she's going to look to start her facility here in Minneapolis, but it's this eco building block, right? So, but she didn't start with like this eco-friendly building material. She started with doing design work for tribes, right? And really thinking about how can we create spaces that reflect cultural values, and how can we then work on the hiring and workforce development here within the tribes to create contractors and to provide thinking about all the trades work that's possible. So she started there. And then when she said, I'm paying this much for my materials, I'm thinking about where they're being shipped in from. She gradually was able to kind of, in concentric circles, expand her business into these other goals. But she started with 1, right? So she said, local workforce is important to me. Equitable hiring is important to me. Providing affordable housing is important to me. So she was able to just pick those 2 And then she noticed over time as she built her own business's capacity that, wow, okay, we could do this much more in a greener way, in a more regenerative way than the other construction builders. And yeah, I feel like she's probably going to hit on a number of these like within the next 20 years, but she started with those two: affordable housing, local workforce.
Great examples. Great examples. So we're nearing the end of this precious time. And one of the things that's always good to do is to make sure everybody has a chance to talk more about something that they go, oh, I should have said this. And so maybe we'll start down at the bottom with Terri and give everybody a chance to wax eloquently and get that wisdom, that insight, that thing, that spark that'll help that startup to get up some mornings when it's going to seem tougher than others, because that's something we haven't spoken about much, but things are hard. For startups, things are always hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In this land, many things are hard for many people. And in this moment, many things are hard on the heart. And so in the morning, you got to get up and go. And the SDGs at least have been that for me personally, but I know for many others. But Terri, some words for the highway.
One of the things in all of the work that I've done, I've spent 30 years working on improving the early childhood development system in the state of Minnesota. In hindsight, one of the things I realized is that you have to accept that this kind of change you're working on takes time. This is not a find a good tech solution, flip the switch, you get a lot of money, that false vision that we have about what a startup is all about. It's much more about a commitment, a journey that you make that as long as you can continue to see progress, that's why that measurement's so important, but so you can see progress and you can see other options of the activities you can do that makes progress towards that goal. Like Mark, I love your story about Cargill. It's like that wasn't what you were working on, but right there it was. And if you worked with them, you got more. That I think so give yourself time is my simplest advice.
Miki.
Appreciate the question that was in the chat that you alluded to earlier, Mark, about what we should focus on, right? One or two goals or all of them or some combination thereof. My general advice would be yes to all of that. So whether you're pursuing one goal at a time, whether you have a scope or a team that's large enough for each team group to take each of the goals, however that works for your organization, your startup, my recommendation is simply to begin. So as Terri just mentioned, it can take time and the progress might seem only incremental. And yet sometimes just moving forward in that next right step is the only moving forward we're able to do. And that's okay. So wherever you are in your startup journey, I encourage everyone who's listening to take that next right step in moving forward in the journey of using the Sustainable Development Goals framework. Impact Hub Minneapolis-St. Paul is a great community of folks that can help offer some ideas, suggestions, a sense of community as you go down that road. But my basic and simple advice would be just to simply start and take one step forward at a time.
Silvia.
I guess to me, the most important part has been being grounded on my spirituality. And it's not about religion. It's not about anything else other than my own force. And I've done it through a lot of discipline, and that is so important for me. I believe that even the ideas come from that space that I've given myself. And that is my meditation practice, which is so important to me, and I so treasure that. And that it doesn't matter if, there are days that are really, really discouraging, but I am so firm, and I just really want to ask people that are starting their business, or to, if that's really their passion, to follow their passion, to be committed to that, and the things will fall into place.
Nikki.
I think just simplify. I think it can feel overwhelming and expensive. So in addition to starting, just simplify, right? You don't have to have the most expensive tech or expertise. And I think really knowing that like all of our businesses are the answers, right? Community-based organizations and businesses are the answers. Because I connect this back and thinking about where our places are in the universe of this work, whether you think about it as social change work, it is, whether you think of it that way, and creating a more equitable planet, right? And for everyone. Yeah, the best minds. I used to work at the Fed, best parts of the world. Like, we're thinking about this, right? Economists are saying public sector, not the answer for some of that. They're not designed to fix these systemic issues. And all these kind of historical legacies that exist from capitalism with a capital C. Not that I'm anti-capitalist, I'm not, but with the capital C. And normally, we're underinvested in. So I think really thinking about, you might be affecting this little part of the world, or this is your niche, but know that like collectively, there's so many of us filling our little niches, and that collective critical mass is what makes those systems shift and change, like, the world to be more equitable, and to reduce some of the damages that have been done to what we call like Aki or Mother Earth. So I think you are that change force, even if you only think you're affecting this little tiny piece of the world.
Amen. And to Bailey and Terri, who from Impact Hub brought us together, but also make that treasure available to all of us in the community. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to close us out with one of the final chats from Miki, Nikki, Silvia, Bailey, Terri. Simply start. Yes. And a very helpful panel with specific examples applicable to many startups, entrepreneurs, and listeners. Thank you so much. Thank you for that comment, Miki. Thank you to panelists, and thank you to Startup Week and Impact Hub for putting us together. Goodbye now. See you again, and see you at the Impact Hub, someday in person, but often by virtual, by digital. Goodbye now.
Thank you, Mark.